says that in the next few weeks, we would like, as we are learning about the great rabbis of the Jewish history, we would like to try and see 4 different responses. So response is also in Hebrew tshuva, and I would like to use these responses for the crisis that, as we began to say, was developing in Yahadut, and the Jews were beginning to feel in the 70th and even more in the 80th century. And as I said, that was the beginning of the process that in the mid-20th century, we found ourselves in a situation in which Torah-observant Jews are very small minority. Now, that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. How it came to be that in the beginning of the 70s...
Sorry, we can hardly hear you.
Oh, well, now...
We can hardly hear you. We can't hear you very well. Very, very low.
Turn your volume up, and I can hear perfectly.
My volume is up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's better now?
No, I'll go out and come in again.
Oh, but here it sounds fine, right? Okay, I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Okay. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so as I said, there is a process in which when we look at the situation of Yahdut in the 70th, in the beginning of the 17th century, and even in its end, still most of the Jews would be defined as Torah observant. Now, we all mature people, we know that defining someone as Torah observant does not mean that he keeps all 613 mitzvot, or even most of them. That can surely be. So we do not discuss here right now the level of observance. What we are trying to understand is how it came to be that the default for a Jew in the beginning of the 70th century and even the 80th century would be at least to define himself as part of the Jewish observant community, while when you look for sure in Europe, also in the United States, in other places, this default changed. And the default now would be that someone would have to choose to become observant. And that is a very big difference. And it's a question that we need to deal with, how it came to be, this difference. What were the forces that pushed towards it? And what were the responses, as I said, the tshuva, the 4, I would like to try and investigate 4, there were more, but 4 classic responses, tshuvot, that were given during mostly the 80th century and the beginning of the 90th century, and how these responses developed in the last 200 years to the different, I don't even know how to call it, different, I don't know want to call it denominations, but different types of observance, different colors, if we want, of Torah observant Jews nowadays. And I hope to be able to speak today about the Baal Shem and the founding of Hasidut. Next week, in Yirtzeh Hashem, about the Vilna Gaon and the founding of the Lithuanian Jewry. The third figure that I would like to speak about is the Khatam Sofer and what we would call today Orthodoxy or ultra-Orthodoxy. And the fourth figure would be Rav Yehuda Elkalai. Oh, we have many challenges today. And the fourth one would be Rav Yehuda Elkalai, that would represent for us religious Zionism as it begins already in the 18th century. So these are the 4 figures that we would like to speak about and learn their Torah. As you can immediately see, these 4 figures, to a very large extent, the choices they made the type of responses they develop, the tshuva, they say, they were giving, are still very much relevant, are still very much alive to this very day. So that's, I think, should be very interesting journey through these four figures. But first, I would like to describe, as I said, the major reasons and factors behind the crisis that Yahdut was under, as I said, as the early modern age was proceeding. And obviously, you can give a whole, I mean, not me, because I am not an expert in any which way, but someone can give a whole course, a whole year about this type of questions. And I don't have the ability, nor the time right now, or even the motivation to go very deep into that. So what we try to do is just give a very, very, very summarized overview of what I believe are the three major areas in which obstacles rose that cause the gradual erosion and in the end, in many places, complete, we may say, complete collapse of traditional observant Judaism. The first one, we may say, is in the religious field. So what do I mean when I speak about the religious field? One that was inherited from the 17th century was everything that happened around the Shabtai Tzvi episode. Now, again, for us, it's something that is very far away in the past. And also, it may be that in our history, the way that we tell our history, that's not an episode that we are happy to teach and to glorify, because there is nothing to glorify. But for the people living through it, it was a disaster, because they really believed that redemption had come. And many rabbis believed that redemption had come. And many people sold their homes and made took very different steps that were irreversible. And very quickly, it was clear that the whole thing was a Shem. So some people, a minority, was trying to cling to the hope. But for the majority of Am Yisrael, it was clear that it was a mistake. But after you ignite the messianic hope, and then you say, no, in a second thought, return to the former situation. Many people cannot just go back. Because if you had make them believe that the hope came true, and now you say, keep waiting. No, we are not willing to keep waiting. We had enough of waiting. If that was not the case, if all these rabbis believed in it, and yet it was not the case, then maybe, we would add, there is no Mashiach at all, and there is nothing to hope for. And that was one very big problem that the Jews were facing. If that was not enough, also in the general society, the modern science was beginning to take baby steps. And there were problems that were about questions of how to interpret the Bible. And is the sun revolving around the earth or the earth revolving around the sun? To be honest, that doesn't seem to be. These were problems that for the Christian church, for some reason, that was seen as very extreme problems. It seems that Jews were not very much involved in this type of discussions, but something else was happening. New science was teaching to doubt. And that was one of the foundations of the new science. It was not only the question, was Aristotle wrong about A or B or C? It was the question, can it be that for 1,000 years, we are telling mistakes or even worse, lies to each other? And if something that was revealed as Aristotle is now revealed as a mistake or a lie, what else that we may believe as true for 1,000 years is also incorrect? And again, for us, we are born much, much later. And we do not feel the same pleasure. We can pretty easily differentiate between the era of sciences in which we operate and we have our doubts, and we understand that doubting is the key many times to find the mistakes and to improve ourselves. And the religious era, and not only the religious, also the educational era and cultural era, in which we cherish and in which we are fond of our traditions. But when science was very new, and these tools of we can improve ourselves by doubting and by not fearing to throw away everything that was given to us from earlier generations. In the beginning, it is very difficult to make these differentiations, because it seems that these new tools are so powerful. They are so good in revealing the truth. Wouldn't they be so good at revealing the truth also in the sense of politics, or, as I said, religion, or human nature, or education? Shouldn't we maybe throw everything away and just begin anew, relying only on our wisdom and intellect and what can be proved, and not on tradition and truths that were passed from generation to generation? Now, I think that for most of us, again, we can differentiate in these areas, and we believe and we understand that what works very well in physics can cause complete disasters when you try to apply it to the human level, as I said, to politics or to family or to religion. But it was not clear back then. And that was another force, another pressure that was, obviously, it was not only in the Jewish religion, it was existing as well in the general population. There was another problem, another crisis that they were facing. There were also historical important factors. The Jews that were forcibly converted especially in Spain, and lived as crypto Jews for 100 years. And now, as religious tension in Europe beginning a little to recede, and there is some, I mean, it's very difficult to speak obviously about pluralism in the 18th century, in the 17th century, it would be a joke, but they were more willing to suffer the existing of other religions. So these crypto Jews begin to return to Yahadut in large numbers. But there is a problem. They completely lost all their tradition. They know the Torah Shebichtav. And they say, now we want to return to the Torah Shebichtav. And then you begin to tell them all the halachot of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that is a cultural shock. Many of them accept, and I guess the majority of them would accept that and return to more or less what we would say normative Judaism. But for some, it's a completely turnoff. And some of the names are very much known. That is more the 17th century. So it would be Uriel de la Costa, it would be Baruch Spinoza, obviously. So these are the first, in a sense, atheists, because they have no tradition. They left Christianity. They wanted to come back to Yahadut. They discovered that Yahadut is not what they thought, it's not what they wanted it to be. And they remain as the citizens of no religion, which is something that was unthinkable of. In Europe for 1,000 years, you had to have some religion. You couldn't just be a free radical element. There was no such thing. But now there were very few in numbers, but some of them were smart people. They were writing books. I mentioned 2 names earlier, and their books were circulating. And Jewish authorities were trying to censor them. But here we come to another important factor. Till now, we're speaking about the religious field, but also in the social field, things were beginning to change. The power of the Jewish communities on their citizens was beginning to recede. And what can in the past could pass was beginning to become much more difficult. And that was because modern state was beginning to emerge. And one of the first things that the modern state would do would be to suck the power from the communities and transfer everything to the level of the state. So if up till now, the community, not only Jewish community, also Christian community, would be responsible for the health of the citizen and the education of the citizen and the social security of the citizen, the state would do nothing of that. The only thing the state would do would be to collect money in order to raise armies and to give capital punishments when needed. But many times, even punishments would be in accordance to Jewish law, and the Jewish communities would be autonomous to have their own courts, their own batei dinim. But now these things change. The modern state wants to take all these powers to its own hands. Now, this is an exchange, it's a partner. We will take care of you, but according to our own terms. Now, these are processes that in the 18th century are only the beginning. The French Revolution would only happen in the end of the 18th century, in its last decade. But it's in the making. Things are happening. The kings are becoming what we would call later absolute dictators. And that would, to us, it seems like something extremely regressive. But to them, it was progressive. Why? Because now the state would really take care of you. It begins to have responsibility towards its citizens. Now, again, it's a process that maybe is somewhat positive, but for the Jews, it was a disaster because it meant the collapse. In the end, it would mean the collapse of Jewish communities. Nowadays, in any modern state, the Jewish community is like a country club. If you want, you join. If you want, you are completely exempt. The only place in which the Jewish community has coercive forces is only here in Israel. Right here, we can force you to marry according to Jewish law. You can circumcise that, you can go to Chutz La'aretz, but if you are here and you are a Jew, then you can only marry according to Jewish law. But in the States or in England, in Europe, in anywhere, even if you're a Jew, no one cares. If you want, you would marry in the synagogue, and if you want, you would marry in the city council. That would be the end. And if you want, you come to shul. If you want, you do not come to shul. If you want, you send your children to Jewish education. And if not, then not. If you want, you pay your taxes to the Jewish community. And if not, no one can make you do anything. That was not the state prior to the process that we are now speaking about. Back in the day, the Jewish community was able to coerce you, to force you to pay taxes, to send your children to Jewish education, to marry according to Jewish law, everything. Basically, if they wanted, they can punish you for not coming to shul. Usually they wouldn't do that. But the state would allow them to do so. To ban books, to burn them, everything was fine. That was not the case anymore. The modern state is never happy with local authorities that are not part of the state organ gathering too much force. We can understand why. So Jewish communities were stripped from their abilities to coerce their members. And then everyone, ish hayashar be'einav yaseh. So everyone will do whatever he desires. If I think that the best course for my child is to send him to Jewish education, I will do that. But if I live, let's say, in Germany, and I think that the best course for him in order to become more acculated in, is there acculturated? acculturated, I think. More acculturated in the general population would be to go to a Goyish high school if they would agree to accept him, which is a different story. But if they will, then that's what I will do. And no one can force me to do anything. So excommunication was only banned in the end of the 18th century. Then they were not even allowed to do that. Yes, that's a process that was, as I said, nothing happens overnight. No social changes are just, almost no social changes are being achieved overnight. But these were things that were in the making. And each one of them would cause, in the end, observance to decrease. That just what was going on. And not only, it's very important to emphasize, not only that specific mitzvot were not observed as they should be. That was always a problem. But I mean that whole communities, families, would just say, you know what? This whole thing of Torah and mitzvot, it's very nice, or maybe not. We do not find ourselves as committed to the whole story. And that was something that was almost not inexistent prior to the period that we are now speaking about. The last element, so we spoke about the religious element, we spoke about the social element, and the last one was, we can say it also social, but it was more of an inner social. It was not about losing the force of the communities to the state. What was happening within the communities? And it seems that in many places, the elites and the common people were becoming more and more estranged to each other. So the Torah elites, the Talmidei Chachamim, were seeing what they call the Ama'arsim, the Balei Batim. A Baal Bayit became a derogatory term. Maybe in some places, maybe to this very day. Right? He's a Baal Bayit, meaning to say he's an ignorant. He doesn't know to learn a Daf Gemara. And that was, in many places, 70% of Jewish population. I speak about men. Women were not even expected, obviously, to learn a Daf Gemara. And if you say that your highest value is Torah learning, but only very small percentage of your population is doing Torah learning, and it sees itself as superior to all the others, and the others are here in order to serve them, that is not a recipe to a healthy society. So the Torah scholars, now obviously we should be very careful here because we are generalizing, but it seems that it comes out from many books that were written in this era, that the common people were feeling that the Torah scholars are dismissive of them, and I'm using here a very gentle language. And the Torah scholars were seeing the masses as Philistines, as people that are uneducated and unredeemable. And that also is a very strong turnoff, as we can imagine, to the common people. Because if I feel that I am not valued, and I'm not valued in this world, and if I go to the drasha, the sermon of the Rav, which, by the way, would not be given every Shabbat, because the Rav is not giving a drasha every Shabbat. The Rav is giving 2 drashot a year, one in Shabbat HaGadol, and one before Pesach, and one in Shabbat Shuvah, before Yom Kippur. And in the drasha, the Rav would just say that if you learn Gemara, then your situation is good, here and also in the entrance to heaven, to Gan Eden, and if not, then not. So how do you feel as your common Jew? Are you now inclined to support financially the Jewish institutions? Not very much. So obviously, I am painting a very extreme picture. And I am sure that were many, many rabbis that knew how to behave and to be mekarev the common Jew. And I'm sure that were many simple Eden, many common Jews that were happy to support and were trying as best as they could to learn Torah themselves and to send their children to yeshivot, etc., etc. But one cannot escape the feeling that the gap was widening and widening. So this is the crisis that we are dealing with. What I describe now is correct mainly towards Europe. In the Muslim world, basically the Ottoman Empire, in which many Jews were living, situation was somewhat different. Modernization did not come to the general population there, and almost everything that we spoke about in the first half of what we were dealing with was not existent. So the communities were as strong as always. Science was not inexistent. So these challenges, they were not confronted with. But in Europe, which, by the way, became now, for the first time, after many, many, many hundreds of years, became the major place for Jewish, for the Jewish population. It's a very interesting fact to learn about the baby boom in Poland. Now, when I speak about Poland, Polania, I do not speak not about what is now called Poland, but about the Lithuanian-Poland Commonwealth, as it was called back then, which was a huge, huge country, almost all of Eastern Europe. And the Jews were allowed to live there basically unhindered. Obviously, you had your pogrom, etc. But relatively speaking, it was very good. And it was a capitalist country, so Jews were able to bring to the fore their abilities of trade, and they were expanding. They were ויאחזו בארץ, ויפרו, וישרצו, ויעצמו בי מאוד מאוד, like it says about Egypt. So I don't have here right now the numbers, but I think that in 100 years, there's something like 5 times over. So quintodropped, how do you say that? Quintupled? Yeah. So that is, by the way, that is, now again, we live here in Eretz Israel, so we saw even more than that, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us here bracha, which is, I don't know if it is even presented in any state, in any place in the world, that 100 years ago here in Eretz Israel, we had, I don't know, 300,000 Jews, 400 maybe, 400,000, and now Baruch Hashem, 8 million. So the numbers are staggering. So maybe we are not as impressed as we should be. But in Eastern Europe, what was happening there was amazing. By the way, it was just as in Egypt, the Goyim also paid notice that the Jews are expanding more and more, and obviously they were feeling that it's coming on their own expansion. Okay, so the majority of Jews, I think I'm correct now, that in the beginning of the 18th century, were living in Europe, and so that was a new thing. But the majority were living in Europe, and they were facing these triple era, these 3 areas of challenges that we spoke about. So we spoke about the religious side, we spoke about the outer social side, we spoke about the inner social side. And now we have 20 minutes left to speak about the Baal Shem Tov, which is obviously completely inadequate. But we will try to do our best. So the Baal Shem Tov was born, I think we said many times, we know when people died, when important people died. We do not know many times when they were born. So the Baal Shem Tov is one of these people that later became extremely famous, but we just do not know when he was born. It was somewhere between 1690 to 700. That's basically 1700. That's basically the years. As you know, the Chabad is this tradition of Yud Chet Elul as the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov. That's a tradition they have. Obviously, I cannot give you any position to it. I just don't know. Okay, so he was born there, somewhere in Eastern Europe. Again, it is contested where exactly. I don't think that any one of us, I don't know, maybe some of us are extremely expert in the geography and the very many small cities in yesteryear of Eastern Europe, but I do not. So I don't even remember the different names that are being given. He was born near Wallachia, and his parents were old when he was born. Now, almost everything I would say today, we can begin with according to the legend. Now, when I say now legend, I do not mean necessarily untrue. I just mean to say that there are extremely few historical resources that we can rely on as reliable when you speak about the Baal Shem Tov, to the extent that 50 years ago, there was still some people going around saying that maybe it did not exist at all. Now, that was always a very extreme position. And about, I think, 40 years ago, they discovered in one of the textbooks, tax collecting books that was preserved in one of the cities around there, they have his signature. So it's very interesting. So that was the final proof for those that needed it, that he really existed. But anyhow, almost everything is traditions and legends. The most reliable book that we have was only written in about 80 years after he died. So everything is from secondhand. So I would just speak, and what is really important, as always, is not exactly what happened, but what was the impact on the Jewish world. And the impact was from the stories and not from when he was really born. So according to the legend, his parents were nearing the age of 100 when he was born. So, okay, maybe not 100, but they were, I guess that they were old. And they died when he was very, very young, at the age of 5. That's according to the story. And now it is not very rare back then that someone would be orphaned in a young age. Unfortunately, people didn't live to a very old age. But I think that here it also serves as part of the Baal Shem Tov as creating something new. So his parents died when he was young, and in a sense, that gives him more room to create something of his own. Now, the community is taking care of him and is being sent to the local cheder on the expense of the community, as was the minhag with orphaned children. Now, the Melamed says, as I guess some of us heard about themselves or about their children, he has a potential, but he is not realizing it. Because the Baal Shem Tov, it seems, preferred going to the forest than sitting in the cheder. Now, for most of the children about which this sentence is being said, they go to the forest or to the local kiosk, I guess, and just eat blueberries. But the Baal Shem Tov, it seems, was going to the forest for what was later known as hit bodedut, meaning going, speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and trying. He felt that what is being taught in the cheder, while obviously important, did not provide his neshama, his soul, with what he needed. And he had, so for most of us, we would sit in school, and if what is being given does not provide our needs, we still sit in school, because that's just what we do. But there are rare exceptions, and he was one of them. So he was going to the forest. Now, again, according to the stories, he met in the forest with an old man who was teaching him a Kabbalah and the secrets of Torah in very young age. Later, according to the story, he told that this old man was Achia Shiloni. Achia Shiloni was the Navi in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, of Rechavam and Yerovam, the generation after Shlomo HaMelech. And again, I give you the story. I give as it's being told. As it's being told, it's very, very interesting, fascinating. And he learned from him. So was he a malach? Was he a magid? Was he a person that he met in flesh and blood? I don't know. But I mean, he didn't have Google to learn from. And nonetheless, later he emerged as a scholar. So someone did teach him, and it was not his Rebbe in the cheder. Anyhow, after a few years, the community basically gives up on the young child, because he's running to the forest, he's not learning. So why should we invest in his learning in the cheder? So they say to him, you need to begin to work and provide yourself. He marries a young girl who dies, unfortunately, quickly and without children. So he's widowed. and he's working in your most lowly jobs in the Jewish community. So one of the most lowly jobs was to be a melamed in the cheder, unfortunately. That was part of the problems of the old world, by the way. Education was not great because they didn't pay enough to the melamdim. So the quality of the melamdim was not always the greatest. And there is much to learn. There is much. By the way, we paid very high price for this mistake. Very high price. Many children went what we call today off the derech because of bad teachers. And so what is even worse than being the melamed? So he was the helper of the melamed. He would be the one, he was the bus driver, or he would be the one taking the children from the home and bringing them to the melamed and then taking them back home after the day is finished. But he was teaching the children as he was walking them in and out. Now, he was not teaching them Gemara. He was singing with them. He was teaching them psukim by singing. Now, some people felt unease with that. They were feeling something is happening here. It's not as we usually learn. And there was opposition to him working with the children. Because what does he do? You should do your work. Just bring them in, bring them back. Do not try to educate them in your strange ways of trying. Obviously, what he was trying to do was to wake up in them something that is more emotional. But as I said, it was just not the way back then. It was not the old school. And if you are not the old school, if it is not, as they say, it's not my way, it's the highway. So they send him away. I guess it's the loss of their children. You were able to have the Baal Shem as the melamed of your children, but that's the fate of many of the great people. That's just what it is. You do not know it after you have an insight. So he was sent away from there, and the stories are fascinating, and we do not have time. In the end, no, it's not in the end. He found another job. This time as the guard keeper of the Beit Midrash. So it would be the shamash. He would be cleaning there, he would be arranging the benches. And according to the story, he would learn in secret. When anyone was looking, he was just behaving as a very simple man. But when no one was looking, he would go to the Sfarim in the Beit Midrash. They didn't even know that he was able to read. And he would learn and learn and learn and learn. And to make a long story short, after a time, it was clear that he is capable. And people began to come to him in order for him to resolve their disputes. Their disputes. And one of the people that came was a certain Rabbi Avraham Katover from a different city. And this Rabbi Avraham Katover was so impressed with the young man that he wanted to marry his girl to him. Now, Rav Avraham Katover was an important rabbi. Now, the Baal Shem Tov said, I'm willing to marry your daughter, but I have a condition. You wouldn't tell anyone that we had made this contract of me marrying your daughter till I would come to your city to take her. And you'd write it down, but don't give me any title. Just write Israel beRabbi Eliezer. That's all. Okay, so Rabbi Avraham agreed, and they wrote the contract, the marriage contract. Rabbi Avraham died on his way back home. His son, Rabbi Gershon Katover, searched through the papers of his late father, and found this contract in which his sister is supposed to marry this person, Israel beRabbi Eliezer, without even a rabbi to his name. Now, they came from a very chashuv family. He went to where the Baal Shem Tov was stationed and tried to look who is the person. And to his bewilderment, he was the guard keeper of the Beit Midrash, he was the shamash, and he walked with very simple clothes. And he seems to be a complete ignorant. and he just couldn't believe that his father would marry his sister to this guy. So in the beginning, he hoped that it's just a mistake. But then the Baal Shem Tov took his own copy of the contract out and demanded that the contract would be fulfilled. Rabbi Gershon had just no choice. And he married his sister. I mean, he was helping in arranging the marriage. But he said, it's such a busha to me. I want you both out of the country. Go to somewhere else and live there. But we cannot have our family associated with. Now, you begin to see what we spoke earlier about the gap between the elite and the common people. And the Baal Shem Tov was happy to comply. So they went to a different place for 7 years. They worked in taking dirt out of the land, he and his wife, and making, I don't know what to even do, for building bricks. And that's what they were doing for 7 years. Later, he would say that these were the happiest 7 years of his life, because he was able to just sit with himself and learn and have this itbodedut, and to strengthen his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to understand who he wants to be and what does he want to give over to the Jewish people. Obviously, that was something, he was not some type of a hermit wanting to live in the desert. As we saw from the story of the children, he was very much involved in wanting to improve the Ruchani situation of the Jewish people. But he needed a way how to do so. And in these 7 years, he was able to understand what does he want to do. After 7 years, Rabbi Gershon, I guess he had some charata or something. He was not feeling happy with sending his sister to behind the dark mountains. So he sent a messenger and brought them back. And he said to Rabbi Israel, to the Baal Shem Tov, you know what? You can be my servant. So you will be my Belagule, right? You drive me on and off, and that's how. And again, they said, fine, I'd be very happy to do so. And Rabbi Gershon tried to learn with him something in order to improve his, and the Baal Shem Tov made himself like he was completely ignorant. So I don't understand anything that you say. And Rabbi Gershon just left it as it is. And okay, and he was Balagule. For a period. There are many stories in this book I mentioned earlier. It's called the Shivchei Baal Shem Tov, the praises of the Baal Shem Tov, about their stories. It's interesting. It's also funny many times. Many of the stories are comical in nature. And obviously, they teach a lot about the nature of the Baal Shem Tov and his humility, but they're also comical in nature. There was a time in which he drove the Agala, he drove this wagon of the Rabbi Gershon. And he was, I don't know if he was engaged in thinking about Torah or about something, and the horses just wandered into mud and got stuck. And Rabbi Gershon tried to go down of the wagon and tried to push the wagon off. And Rabbi Israel, they were not successful. And then Rabbi Gershon was worried. He knew we need to send someone to call for help. But he did not count on the Baal Shem Tov to go. He was afraid the Baal Shem Tov would go and not return. So he said, you would wait with the horses, and I would go and find help. As immediately as he disappeared from sight, the Baal Shem Tov used his forces, and just the horses were out of the mud. And when Rabbi Gershon came back with all this help, the wagon was out. Now, Rabbi Gershon was completely mad. If you were able to take it out, I mean, obviously he didn't understand that he used special forces. They said, if you were able to take it out, why didn't you do it with me? So these stories are just repeating themselves again and again. And Rabbi Gershon is just not open. Now he was a good guy, Rabbi Gershon. It's important to understand. He's not some evil man, chas v'cheila. He was a tzaddik in his way. And obviously a Talmid Chacham. But he couldn't even fathom that there would be a different way of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was just behind, way away from how they perceived reality and Avodat Hashem. At the age of 36, according to the story, Achia Shiloni says to the Baal Shem Tov, time had come. You need to reveal yourself. And the Baal Shem Tov begins suddenly to teach Torah. And you can imagine the face of Rabbi Gershon, and he sees that his dejected brother-in-law is, I can only compare it to Kalba Savua suddenly understanding that his son-in-law, right, Akiva, who married his daughter, is Rabbi Akiva. So that was a complete shock. Rabbi Gershon later, they became good friends, and Rabbi Gershon later made Aliyah to Eretz Israel. There are also stories about their connection when he was in Eretz Israel. Again, fascinating, we don't have the time. But what the Baal Shem Tov began to do was to, in modern language, say market this idea of you are able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only through Torah. Now, it's not that Torah, chas v'chayla, is anything less important than what it has been up till now. But it is not the sole way. It is not the only way. There are other ways to connect. You can connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu by sitting around the table and having good food and having a nice l'chaim and connecting to Hashem. And speaking about Torah, maybe simple words, something that your Torah scholar would laugh about. But if you are feeling connected, if you are part of this Jewish world, then you are now connected to. If you dance to the sing of a pasuk, then you are part of this Jewish world, then you are connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These were things that were unthinkable. And we have to know that in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, it was not yet a mass movement. Obviously, it was something that was meant to be. The whole purpose was to make it a mass movement. But the Baal Shem Tov is mainly sitting with very few selected students, most of them very scholared, very knowledgeable in Torah, man. They didn't come to him to learn Torah. So he obviously had Torah. But that was not the purpose why they came to him. They came to him because they understood that there is a need for something to supplement. A man, a woman, person, is not made only out of mind. Some of us are very much oriented towards intellectual, and that's fine, that's good. But the majority of us, human beings, also have a heart and a stomach and feet and hands. And you need to operate everything in order to enclose yourself, in order to cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, for us, what I'm saying now are simple things. I don't think that anyone here is extremely shocked by what I just said. But it was a shock back then. And even for us nowadays, I think it's something that can and should be emphasized. A child that does not necessarily succeed in his learning in school. It can happen. Not everyone success. But that is not the only thing in life. That is not the only thing in Jewish life. And he can connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through other ways as well. And that is something that he brought for us, for our children, for our communities. And that is something that the Baal Shem Tov was trying to teach them, that you can find the Kadosh Baruch Hu everywhere. In the language of Chazal, leit atar panui minei. There is no place which is vacant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is a lesson, that is a tshuva. That is returning to God. Because if you thought up till now that God is enclosed only in Torah, you are now making tshuva, and you can discover HaKadosh Baruch Hu everywhere. That was, obviously, I'm simplifying. I mean, even simplifying is the wrong word. But I believe that that's one of the main essences of what the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidut was bringing into the world. Leit atar panu minei, not only as a theological principle, but as an existential principle, that you can find a Kadosh Baruch Hu in every place and in every act you are doing. And that was one way, a very successful way of dealing with this crisis. Places in which Hasidut was growing were basically almost everywhere incalculated, meaning like after taking a shot, inoculated, yeah, from the crisis that we spoke about in the beginning. Think about Eastern Europe. Now, I'm not saying that everything goes perfect, very far from that, but much stronger in their ability to resist to the forces of secularism, of atheism, of everything that later swept so much of our Jewish brothers and sisters. So that was a very short version about the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidism and what we can take. It's not only a history, it's our life. What can we take from them? Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, I hope to speak about what became known as the Mitnagdim and about the Vilna Gaon and his response to Hasidism and to the crisis of his time. Thank you very much, and may we have a very good learning during this month of Elul and the Yemei Tshuva.